three of you can simply if you like. And thank you very much for your submission. You've sat through that helpful discussion we had with Mary Harris, so you're aware of the general ambit of the issues and that may help focus your responses. Would you like to make a preliminary statement if your other colleagues have anything to add and then answer questions, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm very glad I said in the Mary Harris submission, the Clerk's submission, because there are some things that I do want to take up with you about what was said. So, but just in terms of a preliminary statement, I guess particularly bearing in mind the Clerk's evidence, I do want to say that I think there is a completely different angle from which you can come at this, and I hope to demonstrate to you that I think it will make it simple and it will provide an easier, simpler, tested environment in which the necessary protocols and procedures can be developed. So I think we're all aware of the environmental changes that have happened. The collection of access card information wasn't even possible 20 years ago. And it's miles better than that. We all know that, everything from gate recognition to, every transaction you do on the internet can be collected and used. So just very, very briefly, and I can come back to this if you want me to, but the context is that there is now the possibility of absolutely huge collection, and the Parliament and government has to tackle that in some way. So what has, I think, lain behind this particular incident that's sparked this privilege here, and has lain behind, for example, the ACC incident, is that there's been a failure to recognise information as a huge asset. And with that, and I'll be very brief here, comes liabilities, and with that comes risks. If you look at the ACC example, I think you can see pretty clearly that they simply failed to recognise that their information was their major asset, and they weren't dealing with it properly. There wasn't all the surrounding things that would be needed to deal with it properly. So these sorts of changes, the environmental changes, can put huge pressure on agencies, and we've seen some pretty good examples of that in the last couple of years. Often you see ad hoc responses, people struggling, perhaps not making decisions on critical cases. So I won't go into that, that's not my business here. But I think, as I said, things can be made easier and simpler, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. For example, the ACC inquiry came up with a set of really good suggestions on governance and leadership, and then once you get that right, you get the management and the systems right. And again, I'm skipping over all of the detail here. And there are well-established laws and guidelines and principles in the Privacy Act and the Official Information Act, which have been well tested. So, for example, just to take one example, the life cycle approach to information can be really useful. Who collects it, who keeps it, is it stored, is it shared, is it disclosed, is it disposed of, all of those kinds of things need to inform. So, and the key thing is having a purpose for the information, and this is where I hope you can see that I'm coming at it from a really quite different angle here that I think will be useful. You need to know why you're collecting it. You need to be open and upfront about it. The people whose information is collected need to know about it. You're not operating so much with information. It's not so much a role-driven context, and there's been a lot of talk about that this morning. You're really operating in a purpose-driven context, and in a context of who actually holds the information and not owns it. I'm going to come back to that ownership point in a minute. So, and also, a lot of people are upset with that. You've got to keep people in the loop. Whatever your systems and protocols are, people need to know what's happening with their information, who's going to see it, and disclose it. So we want to avoid situations where people are taken by surprise. Now, coming to the point of ownership, I have to say that we, in our information law context, do not regard ownership as a useful concept. We actually think it's something of a flying alley, a cul-de-sac. And Sir Grant Hammond yesterday in his evidence made the same point. I think he made it in passing, so you may not have picked up on it
No,
strongly.
I don't think there's any real disagreement with that concept, is there?
Well, there's been more to talk about ownership just right now, so I thought I needed to make that really clear. Okay. Generally speaking, I mean, take the example of a doctor's office, you know, think of the information that that doctor holds. He doesn't own it. The person, the patient doesn't own it. Maybe the lab, does the lab own the lab tests? Does the x-ray person own the x-rays? You know, I won't go on about it, so it's going to be Mr. Chairman if you take the point, but it's not going to be a particularly useful way to structure it in my view. The other point that you actually asked us about was the question of metadata. I think from looking at some of the records from this committee, I understand that you have heard many times that metadata is not a particularly useful concept. Again, this is a slightly lesser point, but metadata it's a fashionable term at the moment, rather than something that needs to be used in a significant way. So, I guess what we would say is that we need to approach it from the point of view of saying, okay, you have a very large amount of information. The discussion this morning has already drawn out how complex that is and how many different ways you can come at it. And, you know, because of my background, I'm very conscious of that. You know, cabinet ministers, MPs, you know, different environments that you're operating in. But I guess what we're saying, and of course we're happy to assist with this as required, is that the information from our point of view, the main sort of information we're interested in is information about people. As it happens, I think most of the information we're talking about in this context is in fact about people. And that the principles in the Privacy Act and all of the legal structure that applies to that, whether it be sort of disclosure, access, withholding grounds, all of those kinds of things, as we've said in our submission, will provide the structure within which